Chapter 13 of The Autobiography of a Newspaper Girl by Elizabeth L. Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. An American Millionaire Hunts Me Up. Dear Miss, will you please be so good as to let me come and see you, as I am interest in a magazine and would like to talk to you about working for it. I will call when it is most convenient for you to see me, if you will write me where you reside. I send this to the publishers of your book to be forwarded, as I do not know where you reside. I am most respectfully, Ebenezer Emmet. I tossed the letter into my waste-basket, and with an exclamation of anger and disgust, gave my typewriter such a loud-sounding bang as made Dinah, who was dusting in the same room, turn round anxiously and say, "I hopes, Miss Polly, dey ain't no bad news?" "No, Dinah," I answered. "Only an impertinent, illiterate man who has read my book wants to get acquainted with me, and he's trying to find out where I live so he can call." "Let me see dat letter, Miss Polly, and ef he give his directions, I hab a mind to go callin' on him and ax an explanation of his conduck." "It's there in the basket, Dinah. Pick it up and read it if you want to," I returned indifferently. Dinah picked up the objectionable missive and proceeded laboriously to read it. "I don't see nothin' wrong wid dat letter, Miss Polly," she remarked when she had got about half through it. "He do seem to live at a right quality like hotel, and he say he hab a magazine which he want yo' to work fo'. Ain't yo' open to magazine work, Miss Polly? Ain't you done tole me when you got lots dat kind o' work to do, you'd make mo' money and pay me $5 a week?" "But Dinah, you don't understand, because you are not an educated person," I said. "No man who writes like that can have anything to do with a magazine. It is not a properly written letter." Dinah did not heed me. She had evidently got to the bottom of the letter, for I heard her muttering to herself over and over again, "Ebenezer Emmet, Ebenezer Emmet, 'spec I seen dat name before." "Miss Polly," she said finally, "don't you reckon dat name seem familiar like?" "I don't think so, Dinah," I replied. "But I be sho' I know dat name," she insisted. "Seems like it hab somethin' to do wid cookin'." And with that she started for the kitchen. There came the sound of rattling among dishes, saucepans, and tins, and Dinah saying several times, "I 'low mus' be here." Suddenly a scream of delight came from the kitchen. "Oh, honey, I done foun' it! Here it am on de tin can, Ebenezer Emmet, Packer. It am de codfish man in 'Meriky." I rushed out to find the kitchen in an uproar. All the contents of the cupboard were spread out in confusion on the table and floor, and in the midst, doing an amateur "cake walk," was Dinah, hugging a blue tin can, on which ran the legend, printed in gay colors, "Salt codfish, ready for immediate use. Price 25 cents. Ebenezer Emmet, Packer, U.S.A." "Didn't I tole you it was familiar like?" exclaimed Dinah. "Ain't I used this goods for picked up codfish and Sunday morning breakfast fish balls ever since I was cookin' for a livin'? Why, Miss Polly, dat Mr. Emmet must be wuff millions of dollars, 'cause everybody uses his codfish." Sure enough, now that I saw the name in print, I knew Ebenezer Emmet's codfish as a household necessity, but I could not believe that the man who packed those tins and the man who wrote the letter to me could possibly be the same. "I'm sure they can't be the same, Dinah," I said discouragingly. "The man who wrote that letter couldn't have anything to do with a magazine, and the rich codfish man would know how to write a proper letter or have a secretary write for him. No, it is somebody else of the same name, or somebody has used the name to attract my attention and make me answer." "Miss Polly," said Dinah solemnly, "I's older than you, I is, and done hearn tell in Ameriky of rich men which couldn't write dey names. Dey is called self-made-em." Dinah's method of reasoning was beginning to have an effect on me. Might not Ebenezer Emmet, the great millionaire, be a self-made man? "Dinah, let me see that letter again," I said. She passed it over, and I read aloud, musingly, "As I am interest in a magazine." "He doesn't say he's going to edit it," I reflected. "Perhaps someone else is the editor, and Ebenezer Emmet only owns it." "He only owns it!" I repeated. "Why, he's rich enough to own 100 magazines, and if he wants any particular person to write for them, who can say him nay?" "I'll answer the letter, Dinah," I said, as I left the kitchen. "I'll tell him he may call to-morrow afternoon, and if he's not the codfish man at all, I'll cough very loud, and you must ring the messenger box for a policeman to arrest him." So I wrote a dignified letter which could not possibly be misconstrued by any bold adventurer seeking the acquaintance of a defenseless American girl in London. "Dear Sir, if you wish me to do some work for your magazine, I shall be pleased to see you at this address at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, when we can talk the matter over. Very truly yours." "Mr. Ebenezer Emmet." Dinah was looking her very best and trimmest the next afternoon when she announced my visitor. To my utter amazement and delight, she had secretly donned the despised streamered cap, which always before she had steadfastly refused to wear. She had also squeezed herself into a much tighter fitting dress than usual, and was as smart, haughty, and dignified in her demeanor as any British parlor maid could possibly have been. Nevertheless, there was on her face a self-satisfied, "I done tole you so" look, as, with what appeared to be a much practiced bow and curtsy, she ushered into our little sitting room a well-dressed, elderly American man, who carried his silk hat not quite familiarly, yet not awkwardly. He was, perhaps, 65 or 70, with kindly blue eyes that shone through his spectacles, and a long white beard. All suspicion and prejudice melted away from my thoughts, and I doubted not that I now shook hands with the great Ebenezer Emmet of tinned codfish fame. He was a very agreeable surprise to me, this millionaire, who had written so grotesque a letter. There was no sign of commonness or vulgarity in his appearance, and his bearing and manner were those of the hearty, whole-souled gentleman, and even when he talked there was only occasionally to be detected a slight deviation from the strictly grammatical. His voice was pleasant, though there was in it a suggestion of the down east drawl often noted among the New Englanders. "I've been going to write to you for some time," he said, when I had given him a real American rocking chair to sit on. "But I'm not much at letter writing, so I put it off, and as I'm going to leave England next week, I made up my mind I'd do it, and hoped you'd excuse all the mistakes of an old man that didn't have the school advantages he'd ought to when he was young. I always take my secretary about with me to attend to letters and things, but 2 weeks ago he was taken sick and had to go away from London, so that's how it was I had to do my own writing." I felt myself growing red for shame of the way I had first received his letter, and I wondered if the good man could possibly have an instinctive knowledge of the whole affair. But he went on. "Though I'm not much on writing, I'm great on reading, and I always keep a lookout in the newspapers. So once I read a letter in an American paper giving a description of the Tower of London. I'd never been to London then, but I'd read a great deal about that old tower, and it was all such prosy, dry-bone reading, that I was very much surprised to find this letter so bright and funny. I hadn't supposed there was anything for comic writing in that subject, but this letter made the tears come into my old eyes for laughing." "Oh, oh!" I exclaimed. "Was it really funny, Mr. Emmet? I was very unhappy when I wrote that letter." The old man chuckled. "It was a good one," he said. "But what do you suppose? The very next day after I read that article, I happened to see a book with a picture cover on it, and I saw it was by the same writer. I bought that book at once, and as soon as I began to read it, I knew it was by the same girl who had written about the tower. There was a picture of you in the front of it, too, and I didn't think you was quite such a happy-looking little girl as you ought to be, though you did write such bright and happy things. Then through the book I'd seem to read between the lines, and what I read between the lines worried me. Yes, it did. I said to myself, there's a little American girl over in England working night and day to earn a living. I wonder if she made plenty of money out of that book. If she didn't, she'd ought to, and what's the matter with me putting her on to something she can make money out of? I made up my mind I'd hunt her up while I went over to England, and that's what I've done, you see." My head was beginning to whirl in anticipation of what this man of millions was intending to do for me. Was he going to adopt me and make me the heiress of the codfish factory? Once a more unpleasant thought came into my head. Perhaps he was going to propose to me. Horrors! He was almost old enough to be my grandfather. Then I remembered that he had spoken of a magazine in his letter. Yes, that was it. He wanted me to do some literary work, just exactly what he said. He pulled out from his pocket a package of notices from a newspaper cutting agency and spread them before me. "You see how I've kept track of you," he said. "I sent to one of these agencies and told them to cut out everything they saw about you. I took a sort of interest, you know." "It is very kind in a great man like you to be interested in me and my work," I said lamely. I really was at a loss for words, and I began to wish the conversation would take a more business-like turn. It did, for his reply was, "You've noticed these sidewalk artists over here in London, I suppose? Well, now, we don't have anything like that in America. Have you ever written an article about them?" "No, I never did," I answered. "That's where I'm ahead of you," he laughed. "For as soon as I saw them, I thought they ought to be written about. I'd like you to write me a magazine article about them, if you will." "I'll do it tomorrow," I returned. "But I forgot to ask you which magazine it was that you wished me to work for. What is the name of it, and who is the editor?" "Oh, my magazine. I'm going to start one, and I haven't got the staff picked out yet." Mr. Emmett began looking about the room, examining the pictures and the furniture. "Do you like to live in England better than in America?" he asked. "You wouldn't rather live in your own country, I suppose? You're quite settled down here?" "Yes, I think so. At least, I want to live in England for several years yet." "Yes," he resumed, as though he had not been asking a question. "I was speaking about the magazine I expect to start in London. There's a great field for it, I'm told, and I shan't lose any money, I know. There's the staff to be picked out, and the name to be decided on, and then the editor and all that. Did you ever edit a magazine?" "No, I never did, but I edited a society page in America. I suppose you will have a very eminent literary man for your editor, and I hope he will like my article about the sidewalk artists." Suddenly an intuition of what this millionaire intended to do came to me like a flash. He was going to start a magazine, and I was to be the editor. He had not said so, but I knew it. "I'll have to write some long letters to you when I go back to America, and I'll get these things about the magazine shipshape when I can find a man for business manager who'll look after my interests all right. Now, about that article you are to do for the first number. You'll need cab fares and have other expenses, so I'll just pay you this $25 now as a little advance on account of expenses." He laid a 5-pound note on the table and rose to go. I was not accustomed to getting paid in advance for something I had not done, and at first I demurred. But he insisted that £5 would not pay nearly all the expenses connected with the article, and finally, much to his amusement, I wrote out a receipt which I had difficulty in getting him to accept. "Received from Ebenezer Emmett, Esquire, £5, the same being some advance money on account of expenses for article about sidewalk artists to be done for his magazine. "I'll write to you from America," he said, as he bade me good-bye. "And if you want to ask any questions, write to me at my factory and mark it personal. But I'll be back in England before many weeks, and then I'm going to fix up the magazine." He was gone, and I, joyous, elated, full of hope, with happiness in my heart and a 5-pound note in my hand, stood trembling and laughing when Dinah rushed in to hear the news, with her eyes shining and her streamers flying. "Oh, Miss Polly, he were de millionaire man, wasn't he? He do put up codfish, don't he? He do hab a magazine, don't he?" cried she. "Yes, Dinah," I screamed, laughing and crying at the same time. "He is the codfish man, and he gave me 5 pounds on account for an article about sidewalk artists, and he's coming back to London to start a new magazine, and I'm to be the editor of it, and we shall be very rich." "Hooray! Hooray! Shout de jubilee!" cried Dinah, dancing around the room with her hands on her hips. "I done tole you so, Miss Polly. Hi yi! I see de money bein' used fur to start the kitchen fires wid. I see I bein' your professed cook wid a white trash kitchen maid underneaf me. Oh, de time of jubilee am come." How we danced about the flat, we three, Judge and old Dinah and I. What promises I made to them both. Judge was to have a winter poodle coat, made to order by a French dog tailor, and need no longer disport himself in the homemade one cut out and stitched by his loving mistress. Dinah was to have the purple hat she coveted in the High Street, if she would promise not to wear it when she went out with me. I was to wear wonderful gowns from Paris, and have a hat for each gown. I would drive through Hyde Park in a Victoria, with Judge on the seat beside me, resplendent in a glowing necktie, and Dinah might go too sometimes, and sit with her back to the horses, and everybody would say, "There goes the editress of the Thingamajig magazine." We all three went out that evening, and spent the 5 pounds in the most absurd purchases, and Dinah cooked a 9-course dinner. The day following, I began immediately on the pavement artist article, interviewing all those who made pictures along the curb, diving deep into the history of the industry. I spent days in the investigation of how the artists lived and where, how much money they took in, and all about them. I wondered if I should engage an eminent artist to illustrate my article for me, and wrote to Mr. Emmett for his opinion on the subject. I also asked whether I should send my article, when completed, to him, or wait for him to come to London. 3 weeks, then a month, then 5 weeks passed, and no reply came. I decided that Mr. Ebenezer Emmett was coming to London, and so did not write. I worked hard on other articles. I planned the kind of magazine I would have. I made up my mind to give a position on the staff to a little English journalist I often saw walking in Fleet Street, looking very shabby and forlorn. One day I opened a package of American papers several weeks old. They had somehow been delayed in reaching me from the other side. On the first page I read a headline, "Death of Ebenezer Emmett, the Great Millionaire." He had died soon after I saw him. My little dream was over. I was again a struggling journalist in London. The romance of the philanthropic millionaire and the poor working girl was, after all, only a storybook occurrence, and I had no right to expect my life to be like a storybook. I would not be the popular, much sought after girl editor of a magazine. I must work my way up steadily and gradually, day by day, week by week, year by year, and when youth had gone and middle age had set in, and I wore glasses and had streaks of gray in my hair, and wouldn't want to wear the bright-hued gowns from Paris, with the gauzy hats to match, why then, perhaps, who knew, might there not possibly come the editorship of a magazine? I sobbed and put my hand on my poodle's head. "Miss Polly, de doughnuts am done and oh, I do 'clare to goodness, something heb happened. Ain't de millionaire man writ yet?" Dinah stood in the door with a dish of American doughnuts in her hand. "He is dead, Dinah, and we are poor again," I answered. I said "poor again," as one who had first been poor, then rich, then gone back again to poverty. "We ain't rich no more? Oh, Miss Polly! But he war a good man, I reckon, and he done mean what he said, but o' course if he die—" "Yes, Dinah, he was a good man. He was one of God's gentlemen," I said. Chapter 14